Let me discuss the essay Introduction to the Power of Forms, written by Stephen Greenblatt, who was born in 1943. So, The Power of Forms in the English Renaissance is a book edited by Stephen Greenblatt, in which there are so many other contributors and all. So, this is an introduction to the book The Power of Forms in the English Renaissance. And Stephen Greenblatt, you may know, he is regarded as the founder figure of the theory New Historicism. And New Historicism is a neo-Marxian kind of literary criticism emerged in the United States in the 1980s and 1990s. It, in fact, shows the significant shift from literary to cultural poetics, or from textual to contextual interpretation. So when theories like new criticism and structuralism were, conquering the field of literary studies with their uh, emphasis on close reading of literary text, and also these ideas like affective fallacy, which says that talking about the influence a literary writer has a writer's personal life has on a work of art, is a fallacy. It's a fallacious view. So there were kind of a setback to the historicist kind of reading of text, biographical reading, the historical, political, biographical, and other kinds of influence that text will have. And also even when the base and superstructure model of Marxian literary criticism was also uh, facing severe charges and was relegated into a backdrop. So, whether it is new criticism or structuralism, or even post-structuralist, deconstructive kind of reading, they all focus upon the text words on the page and their interpretations and the chances of misinterpretations and multiplicities of meanings. These are the things. And discussing the background of literary texts were considered something bad. So at that time came Stephen Greenblatt and a group of neo-Marxian critics who, taking inspiration from various thinkers like Michel Foucault or even post-structuralist theorists, they started talking about a new historicist kind of reading. New historicism is different from the old historicism in the sense that under new historicism we are not we are no longer talking about the past or the background of any literary text. So normally we have this impression that literature reflects life. No, it is a background. It is something stands apart from something in reality, stands apart from reality, and it simply reflects the social time. Contrary to that, one new historicists believe that it is embedded, historically embedded in a society, like law or politics or dance or music, uh, other kinds of fields of life, which all together, uh, you know, uh, you know, together contribute what we call culture. When we talk about culture, what is culture? It includes all social practices within a given society. So, in the same way, literature is also one among the various other fields, just like politics or just like religion, just like art, just like that, art and literature, they are part of a given society, and they are also actively involving in the various power struggles and issues in a given society. They are taking part in the competition for power. So, inspired by Michel Foucault's historical investigations of medical and penal institutions and his theoretical investigations of power, New historians see the literary work as a vessel tossed in a social area of competing interests, antagonistic values, and contradictions. So they are influenced by Michel Foucault's analysis. Major works by Michel Foucault include Discipline and Punish, The History of Sexuality, Madness and Civilization, The Birth of the Clinic, and so on. So he has analyzed the issues of power, discourse, things like that, and the society and how various power structures operate in a society. So this acted as a great influence. Also, the post-structuralist ideas. Literary works are fields of force, places of dissension and shifting interest, occasions for the jostling of orthodox and subversive impulses. So in the same, literary works are not, they are not just reflecting reality, but they are fields of force, or they are places of dissension and shifting interest. You can find subversive influences and orthodox elements within the same literary text, according to Greenblatt. He had even made use of Mikhail Bakhtin's ideas of subversive containment dialectics. Every text will contain both of the subversive elements as well as the orthodox values, and it is every text is a battlefield. In the same sense as in a society, there will be competing interest and competing power groups fighting for power between each other. You can find different power, operations of power within same work, in a literary work as well. There will be the dominant ideologies inherent in it, as well as the minority or subversive impulses as well. So the new historicists conceive of a literary text as situated within the institutions, social practices, and discourse that constitute the overall culture of a particular time and place, and with which the literary text interacts as both a product and a producer of cultural energies and codes. So a literary text is situated within the institutions. It is not something apart from others, just reflecting the reality. No, it is one among them. It is situated within the institutions and social practices and discourses. And at the same time, it interacts both as a product of a social scenario or a social system, and also a producer of cultural energies and codes. We need to take it into consideration both these aspects of a literary text. And Louis Montrose, one of the prominent New Historicist thinker, described New Historicism as a reciprocal concern with the historicity of texts and the textuality of history. So every text will be part of a historical system. So we need to take into consideration the historicity of text. A text as an active player in the power struggles of a given time. That is the historicity of the text. And also every history has to be considered as one text alone. Textuality of history is made up of various texts, and so it's a reciprocal. New historicism is a reciprocal concern with the historicity of text and the textuality of history, according to Louis Montrose. I have taken a quotation from Peter Barry's beginning theory here, in which demystification of Shakespeare. These Stephen Greenblatt and others are they are especially Stephen Greenblatt is also known as a Shakespearean scholar in the sense that he had applied new historicist theory in understanding the Renaissance and Shakespearean works, Renaissance works, especially Elizabethan period, and also especially in uh, Shakespeare's works. And also Louis Montrose also has written various things about Shakespeare. Especially Shakespeare was a subject of thought for them. You can read Peter Barry's beginning theory. In that there is an example given on Midsummer Night's Dream. So this quote is taken from the text, the beginning theory, where earlier criticism had mystified Shakespeare as an incarnation of spoken English. It means the new historicism found the plays embedded in other written texts, such as penal, medical, and colonial documents. So in the Elizabethan period, there are different documents like penal documents or medical documents and colonial documents, and Shakespeare's work is another document among these. So we need to take it into consideration other documents like penal, medical, or colonial documents in order to understand Shakespearean text as well. You cannot simply say that Shakespeare is beyond all influences of age and he is a great writer, universal writer. No, that is not the way to consider. You need to take into consideration the historical, political, and other situations during his time in order to understand what the meaning of those texts conveyed to the audience. Read within this archival continuum, what they represented was not harmony, but the violence of the Puritan attack on carnival, the importance of slavery, the rise of patriarchy, the haunting of deviants, and the crashing of prison gates during what Foucault called the age of confinement at the dawn of carceral society. That is what he says that in the Louis Montrose says about Louis Montrose as quoted in Peter Barry, and especially if you talk about Foucault's idea of the age of confinement or the dawn of carceral society. He was talking about the birth of prison, discipline and punish, how the society emerged out of all this, and the you know the surveillance systems in the you know society and things like that. So the major new historicist thinkers include Stephen Greenblatt primarily, Louis Etienne Montrose, Stephen Milne, Jonathan Tolimo, Catherine Bilsey, etc. So in this essay, Introduction to the Power of Forms in the English Renaissance, it is talking about the staging of Shakespearean work, tragedy, uh, you know, on Richard II during the time of Queen Elizabeth. The work, Shakespearean work, Richard II, how, the staging of that, and the various ideological issues and political issues related to that is being discussed in the essay. So in the essay it says that you can take the essay I have sent. I am Richard II. Know ye not that? Exclaimed Queen Elizabeth on August 4, 1601, in the wake of the abortive Essex rising. So, I am Richard II, know ye not that, is a statement in the play. So, Queen Elizabeth was talking about that dialogue based on an abortive Essex rising. There was an attempt of rebellion against her during that time in 1601, and in the wake of the rebellion, she was taking a dialogue from Richard II and talking about a probable influence the text may have in the uprising against her. On the day before the rising, someone had paid the Lord Chamberlain's men 40 shillings to revive their old play about the deposing and killing of Richard II. So the Richard II was a king in the past who was deposed and killed. So during the rising against Elizabeth, somebody argued that they staged this play in the open theater by giving that money, and the deposing and killing of Richard II must have influenced the people, and they may be even thinking about the chance of doing the same in the time of Elizabeth as well. That kind of an argument was there at that time. So that is what he mentions as the dialogue by Queen Elizabeth. I am Richard II. No, you know that. There's a dialogue in that. As far as we know, the play, almost certainly Shakespeare's, was performed only once at the Globe. But in Elizabeth's bitter recollection, the performance has metastasized. This tragedy was played 40 times in open streets and houses. So, according to historical investigation, there is only one situation in which it was played, it was staged, that too in the Globe Theatre. But Elizabeth thought that this play had been performed 40 times in open streets and houses with a view to influence the masses against her. The Queen enjoyed and protected the theatre against a moralist who charged that it was a corrupting and seditious force. She evidently sided with those who replied that it released social tensions, inculcated valuable moral lessons, and occupied with a harmless diversion those who might otherwise conspire against legitimate authority. But there were some in the Essex faction who saw in the theatre the power to subvert, or rather the power to wrest legitimation from the established ruler and confer it on another. This power, notwithstanding royal protection, censorship, and the players' professions of unswerving loyalty could be purchased for 40 shillings. So, taking into consideration the argument that Queen Elizabeth argued that this play had been staged 40 times as a plot against her, but even when we know that about that kind of an argument, when we talk about Queen Elizabeth, we know that she knew the importance of theatre. She protected the theatre. She enjoyed the theatre activists, whereas there were some groups within her society who were against it. So, staging theatres and all that. You may know that in history, especially during the Puritan time and all, the theatres were closed down. So there were a group within the English society who were against theatres and all that. But even at that time, the Queen, she promoted theatres. But the same Queen, is reported to have expressed her displeasure at being staged the play the Richard II. Maybe because she may know, or even her opponents may know, the power of theatre in influencing the people. The story of Richard II was obviously a highly charged one in a society where political discussion was conducted, as in parts of the world today, with Utopian indirection. Clearly, it is not the text alone, over which the censor had some control, that bears the full significance of Shakespeare's play or of any version of the story. So, if Queen Elizabeth was angry against staging the play Richard II, why was it? If there is something, some elements within the play, within the text, against the ruler, present ruler, she could very well censored it. But so it is not the meaning of the text or meanings of the words in the text that might have prompted her, but as we the new historians would say, the entire situation of staging that play. So the meaning of a certain work is affected not only by the words on the page but also the entire situation. So it is not clear, it is not the text alone or any version of the story. It is rather the story's full situation. The genre is thought to embody the circumstances of his performance, the imaginings of his audience that governs his shifting meaning. So the meaning of that play at that particular period of time, the genre of it, the circumstance of his performance. It was performed during a failed, surrounding a probable uprising against the present ruler, the imagining of his audience. So an audience who knew all these things, how they would have interpreted the meanings of certain dialogues. These all governs his shifting meaning. 40 times in open streets and houses. That is what Queen Elizabeth says. For the Queen, the repeatability of the tragedy. So in 40 times it had been played, it had been staged, and hence the numbers of people who have been exposed to its infection is part of the danger, along with the fact, or rather her conviction, that the play had broken out of the boundaries of the playhouse, where such stories are clearly marked as powerful illusions, and moved into the more volatile zone, the zone she calls open of the streets. So she knows that it is in the open streets that it has been played. There is a huge difference between staging a play in a theater house and outside. In the theater's house, those audience who go and watch the a drama in a theater house, they are prepared. Now they know that it is only a play, so they know that their inner mind must have guarded themselves against any misdirection of meaning or misuse of the entire concept. All these, but in open theater, every kind of people will be coming and going, and they may not be so guarded against it. That is what. In the streets, the story begins to lose the conventional containment of the playhouse, where audiences are kept at a safe distance both from the action on stage and from the world beyond the walls. And in the wake of this subversive deregulation, the terms that mark the distinction between the lucid and the real becomes themselves problematic. Are the houses to which Elizabeth refers public theatres or private dwellings where her enemies plot her overthrow? Can tragedy be a strictly literary term when the Queen's own life is endangered by the play? So, where this play has been staged 40 times, all those places were it the places where her opponents, uh, you know, planning a plot against her, or even the very ran a tragedy. When her own life is in a kind of a tragic situation, is it proper to call it staging a tragedy like that? Modern historical scholarship has assured Elizabeth that she had nothing to worry about. So the modern historian says that if Queen Elizabeth was worried about that kind of a probable misunderstanding of the text or understanding of the text, that was unfounded. Richard II is not at all subversive, but rather a hymn to Tudor order. So the entire plot of the story is not against the Tudors, but in favor of the Tudors. Tudors means the dynasty, which Queen Elizabeth includes. The play, far from encouraging thoughts of rebellion, regards the deposition of the legitimate king as sacrilegious or blasphemous act that drags the country down into the abyss of the chaos. So the meaning of the entire text is that the killing of Richard II led the country into chaos. That is the meaning of the play. That Shakespeare and his audience regarded Bolingbroke as an usurper, declares J. Dow Wilson, is incontestable. So a Shakespearean critic J. Dow Wilson says that Bolingbroke, who was an usurper, was considered, was considered a bad person by the Elizabethan society. But in 1601, neither Queen Elizabeth nor the Earl of Essex were so sure. So when the exact thing was happening, now modern scholarship knows that there was no threat to Elizabeth because Elizabeth survived, right? So during that time, Elizabeth was not so sure of her own position. After all, someone on the eve of a rebellion thought the play sufficiently seditious to warrant squandering £2 on the players, and the Queen understood the performance as a threat. Moreover, even before the Essex Rising, the actual disposition scene was carefully omitted from the first three quarters of Shakespeare's play and appears for the first time only after Elizabeth's death. So during the time, the disposition or the killing scene of Richard II was not allowed, it was censored during that time. How can we recount or how can we account for the discrepancy between Dow Wilson's historical reconstruction and the anxious response of the figures whose history he purposed to have accurately reconstructed? So here, Stephen Greenblatt is not only reading the meaning of the text in the context of the Elizabethan period, but also the interpretation of that play, Richard II, by a Shakespearean scholar called J. Dow Wilson. The answer lies, at least in part, in the difference between a conception of art that has no respect whatsoever for the integrity of the text, and one that hopes to find, through historical research, a stable core of meaning within the text, a core that unites disparate and even contradictory parts into an organic whole. So, in the historical investigation, we will be finding some, we will be trying to find some kind of a meaning in the text. That whole may provide a perfectly orthodox celebration of legitimacy and order, as measured by homilies, royal pronouncements, and official propaganda. But the Queen is clearly responding to something else, to the presence of any representation of deposition, whether regarded as sacrilegious or not, to the choice of this particular story at this particular time, to the place of the performance, to her own identity as it is present in the public sphere, and as it fuses with the figure of the murdered king. So even though the historical scholarship may say that the entire play was a hymn to the Tudor order, we cannot be so sure of it, because every text contains some kind of a subvertive elements. So the Queen was clearly responding to something like this: the presence of any representation of deposition. The Richard II, the king, was deposited, or he was subjected to deposition and he was killed. So any representation of that can bring back some kind of an idea among the audience that it is possible for the present king as well, whether regarded as sacrilegious or not, to the choice of this particular story at this particular time, to the place of the performance, to her own identity as it is present in the public sphere, and as it fuses with the figure of the murdered king. So all these can have a different meaning in the society. That is what Queen Elizabeth was worried about. Dow Wilson is not a new critic. He doesn't conceive of the text as an iconic object whose meaning is perfectly contained within its own formal structure. So he was not a new critic. who is focusing only on the words on the page. Yet for him, historical research has the effect of conferring autonomy and fixity upon the text, and it is precisely this fixity that is denied by Elizabeth's response. So he was thinking that any text will be having a fixed meaning. So he says that the text doesn't have, the play Richard II doesn't have any such meanings. But Queen Elizabeth, you know, may not be finding it like that during her time. So Dover Wilson's work is a distinguished example of the characteristic assumptions and methods of the mainstream literary history practiced in the first half of our century. And a further glance at these may help us to bring into focus the distinctive assumptions and methods exemplified in the essays collected in this volume. In this volume means, as I said, this particular essay is an introduction to the book called The Power of Forms in the Elizabethan society. So in the text which or in the chapters that follows, they will be Stephen Greenblatt and others will be analyzing various issues related to it. So we don't have to focus upon that. So to be sure, these essays are quite diverse in their concerns. So he's talking about the essays, the chapters, various chapters in the book, and represent no single critical practice. A comparative glance, for example, at the brilliant pieces by Franco Moratti, John Trocard, will suggest at once how various this work is. So I don't have to focus upon that. So I think to what we may call the new historicism, set apart from both the dominant historical scholarship of the past and the formalistic criticism that partially displaced this scholarship in the decades after World War II. The early historicism tend to be monological. So he is talking about, Stephen Greenblatt is talking about the difference between the old historicism and the new historicism. The old historicism was monological. It was saying that history has one single set of meaning. Every they will be coming out with one aspect of one version of historical scholarship. That is, it is concerned with discovering a single political vision, usually identical to that said to be held by the entire literate class or indeed the entire population. So they will be talking about Victorian age or Elizabethan age. They will not focus that there will be competing interest and competing power groups within the society. So uh, you know this vision, most often presumed to be internally coherent and consistent, though occasionally analyzed as the fusion of two or more elements, has the status of an historical fact. So this is the way old historicism works. There is one monological way of seeing factual historical issues. It is not thought to be the product of the historian's interpretation, nor even of the particular interest of a given social group in conflict with the other groups. So he is talking about the textuality of history. When we say that history is just another text, that is what we mean by textuality of history. So that means that it is subject to multiple interpretations. So you can interpret any historical text just like you interpret a literary work. So protected them then from interpretation and conflict, this vision can serve as a stable point of reference beyond contingency to which literary interpretation can securely refer. So that is the way how history was, or the old history was. It was thought to be a fact, but now it is says that we consider it as a text that can be subjected to any kind of interpretation. Literature is conceived to mirror the period's belief, but to mirror them as it were from a safe distance. So literature was also considered to be the reflection of reality, contrary to what new historians believe that it is an active player in the power struggles of a time. The new historicism erodes the firm ground of both criticism and literature. So there is no such a firm ground where we can distinguish criticism and literature. It tends to ask questions about its own methodological assumptions and those of others. In the present case, for example, it might encourage us to examine the ideological situation not only of Richard II but of Dow Wilson on Richard II. So when you read Richard II, the play, in a new historicist point of view, you will be studying the Richard II, the historical circumstance of staging that play, the circumstance of Queen Elizabeth's reaction. Not only that, but also the scholarship on Richard II, or how various critics read Richard II and how their own political position must have influenced their interpretation of the play. For example, Dover Wilson, the lecture from which I have quoted, the political background of Shakespeare's Richard II and Henry IV. by Dow Wilson was delivered before the German Shakespeare Society at Weimar in 1939. So Dow Wilson gave a lecture on this play in 1939 to the German Shakespeare Society. We might, in a full discussion of the critical issues at stake here, look closely at the relation between Dover Wilson's reading of Richard II, a reading that discovers Shakespeare's fear of chaos and his consequent support for legitimate, if weak, authority over the claims of ruthless usurper, and the eerie occasion of his lecture. These plays, he concludes, should be of particular interest to the German students at this moment of that everlasting adventure which we call history. So, J. Dover Wilson was reading about Richard II and the possible meanings it may have in the society during the time of fascist Germany, 1939. So that moment is significant. Moreover, recent criticism has been less concerned to establish the organic unity of literary works and more open to such works as fields of force, places of dissension and shifting interest, occasions for the jostling of orthodox and subversive impulses. So, these recent criticism, new historians, they will be focusing upon both orthodox and subversive impulses within the text. The Elizabethan playhouse, playwright and player, writes Louis Adrien Montrose in a brilliant recent essay, exemplify the contradictions of Elizabethan society and make those contradictions their subject. If the world is a theatre and the theatre is an image of the world, then by reflecting upon its own artifice, the drama is holding the mirror up to nature. As the problematizing of the mirror metaphor suggests, Renaissance literary works are no longer regarded either as a fixed set of texts that are set apart from all other forms of expression and that contain their own determinate meanings, or as a stable set of reflections of historical facts that lie beyond them. The critical practice represented in this volume means in the text that follows after this essay challenges the assumptions that guarantee a secure distinction between literary foreground and political background, or more generally between artistic production and other kinds of social production. So, literary production or literary text is just like any other production in a given society. Like any other field, it will also be an active player in the society. So, such distinctions do in fact exist, but they are not intrinsic to the text. Rather, they are made up and constantly redrawn by artists, audiences, and readers. These collective social constructions, on the one hand, define the range of aesthetic possibilities within a given representational mode, and on the other hand, link that mode to the complex network of institutions, practices, and beliefs that constitute the culture as a whole. In this light, the study of Ranner is an exploration of poetics of culture. So he says that this essay is just an introduction to a book, and he is using the scenario of Richard II just to prove his point. And in this work, he calls new historicism as the poetics of culture. And in fact, Stephen Greenblatt wanted to call his theory as the poetics of culture, but later somehow inadvertently he had used the word new historicism in the journal representations, and it became current. So this is the way he is analyzing the entire text. So we need to take into consideration when we analyze a text using a new historicist point of view, we will take some other non-literary text as well. So we by taking some other historical investigation, historical documents at that time, we will be reading the text. Also, we under new historicism, they will be not only reading the text or the time of its publication, but also its subsequent acceptance and production and other processes in the later histories as well. Thank you.